Namaskar, I'm Ashok Vyas, and by the name Ashok means one who is without shock or grief. So by nature, I'm happy, but some days you are more happy, or rather, you are happier. And what makes you happier is the presence of the guest who you would be meeting, and he brings such rich experience. I would say wisdom, knowledge, and whatnot. So let me take this opportunity of welcoming Philip Goldberg. Ji. Namaste and pronounce to you.
Namaste to you, Ashok.
So when we read about you, we know that you are an author, you are a public speaker, you are a spiritual counselor, you are a writing coach, and you are also with Hindu University of America, uh, increasing the level of not just knowledge, but awareness of the absolute in your unique way. So let me request you, if I may, to share with us the initial questions that were bothering young Philip Goldberg.
Well, that was a long time ago, Ashok, and I was a student in the 1960s. And any of your listeners who were here in America in the 1960s or read about it or studied it in a history class, because it's a long time ago now, you would know that it was very turbulent and challenging time period, especially for young people. And I was in that category of young people who wanted to change the world and was very dissatisfied with conventional wisdom and very upset about uh, social conditions, civil rights, and especially the Vietnam War. So I was very politically active. I had been raised in a very extremely secular household where there was nothing of any trace of religion or spirituality. But as part
I think your audio slightly.
oh
It came back, came back. We lost you again. I think you unmuted. You muted yourself. You're on mute. Something got pressed. Probably it's mute. Yeah. No, no. Unmuted, but no sound. Some wire loose or something.
I unplugged it and plugged it back in.
Now it came back. Now it came back.
Okay. So should I begin somewhere?
Yeah, I will edit it. Yeah.
Okay. So a part of the experience of many young people back then was we were unhappy and anxious, and we, for some of us, that included wanting to understand life better, understand who we are, what we are, what we're made of, how we connect to the rest of the universe and to one another, and how to be happy, how to have a fulfilled life. And all the conventional answers were just not satisfying. So in that context, in the what was then called the counterculture, the circles of people who were searching and struggling, um, and trying alternative ways of living. Um, the wisdom that came to us from India, mostly in the form of what we call Hinduism and Buddhism, and within Hinduism, especially Vedanta philosophy and yoga philosophy, those insights, those great teachings, started to be available to us in books, and people would hand out and borrow books from one another because very very few of us could afford to buy them, and we were in my case, I as soon as I read some of the texts, at first it was Westerners, American philosophers and psychologists and people like that, poets, writing about Eastern philosophy, Indian philosophy. And then I went right to the sources. So I remember the first time I read the Gita, first time I read the Upanishads. I couldn't get enough. It was just this breath of fresh air. It was like, oh my God, I'm finally finding some answers that are in a different category from religion as we all understood it, and that we had all rejected it. This made sense. It held up to reason. It was not incompatible with science and history as we knew it. And nobody asked me to believe in anything I couldn't believe in. This was important to us back then, because we were not trusting of authority figures in any realm of life, much, and especially religion. So this seemed more like, we could consider these teachings something like hypotheses, something like scientific insights, something like revelations that come to great thinkers and great minds. And we could investigate on our own. And in that context, it became very clear to me, I don't know why to this day I resonated so strongly with these teachings. It was unlike anything you would predict if you knew my background. But so maybe it was a past life, as a yogi. I mean, I have no idea. But I wasn't the only one. There were hundreds of thousands of us drawn to these teachings. And in that context, some of the gurus and swamis and Buddhist teachers started to come in larger numbers in the 60s. Prior to that, there were only historical figures like Swami Vivekananda and Yogananda, whose autobiography was very popular, but they were gone. And then suddenly gurus started to come. So we went.
Allow me to interrupt, and we will
Yeah,
continue from
please,
here. Right?
please.
Yeah. So since you mentioned about Srimad Bhagavad Gita, you also said that it was compatible with science, and you had your own, if I use the term loosely, like mental conditioning by your surroundings where you're skeptical and you process it in your own way. So, if you recollect, what was it which resonated with you to the extent that over 50 years or for 5 decades, you have reached to the stage where you not just assimilated it in yourself, now you are also sharing Srimad Bhagavad Gita with
Well,
others.
I've actually been doing that for a long time, but um, it's a very good question. What exactly was it? And when I think about it, I think one, it it told me that I was not just this personality called Phil, that there was something more, something that you get glimpses of maybe from time to time. If you're walking in nature, if you have certain experiences, you sense something. And I was sensing something. And I have to be honest, we were taking drugs too at that time. And sometimes the drug experience pointed to something, but it was dangerous at the same time. So now we were finding teachings about expanding consciousness in a safe and reliable way. That was important. But to know that it was not just wishful thinking or imagination, that my identity, what I truly am, is not just this personality called Phil in this body that was, changing all the time. That was one thing, and it made sense, and that I was not separate from the rest of the cosmos, the universe, but that what I am is what everything is. Somehow this made sense to me. It made intuitive sense. But what was most striking was they said the unveiling of this, the awakening to this reality, there are methods to do this. This is not just speculation. So there's all this repertoire of practices within yoga and Vedanta and Buddhism that you can try. You can learn to meditate. You can learn to do yoga asanas. You could do all these, methodologies, and think of them as technologies. You can sample them and see if the theory holds up. No one said you have to believe this or you'll go to hell. Or don't believe, if you believe it, you'll be saved. It was nothing like that. It was, here's some insights of our great rishis, and you try it out for yourself, see if it makes sense to you, see if it works, but know that this is practical. There are methods you can employ, and those methods will change your life, will transform you, will give you keys to finding inner peace and more happiness and greater mental acuity and more compassion, all the promises that the teachings propose. That's exactly what I wanted, and I was searching for ways to find more happiness, to find some inner peace, to quiet my crazy mind, to rid myself of certain bad habits. And then the promise that there were natural means of doing this through various techniques and methods was very appealing to me. So I started experimenting and trying it out. And that was convincing, that promise. In the Gita, it talks about having, I'll never forget the first time I read this, I said, this is what I want. It said the yogi has equanimity, inner stability and peace in loss and gain, in pain and pleasure, in defeat and victory. And I said, okay, that's what I want. I want that inner peace and stability because my life was turmoil. There was another event at that time. I grew up in New York. I moved to Boston in the middle of all this turmoil. And someone told me about the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And there's a room, a gallery called the Temple Room. And I didn't know anything about Buddhism or Hinduism at the time. And I was told, to go and see that artwork. And it was it's a fairly small room, but it's beautiful and elegant. It's still there, of these beautiful Buddhist statuaries of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And I remember walking around and looking at the faces in statues and thinking, whatever those guys had, I want it. I want that peace. I want that equanimity. That was a very important moment. And then I was doing all this reading and I thought, oh, it's actually achievable. It's actually possible. So I started experimenting, and that launched me on my own spiritual path. And I found this affinity with India, and especially with Vedanta and the yoga philosophy. And I just wanted more and more. So in my case, as with many people at that time, different people were drawn to different gurus and different lineages and different teachings. And on the heels of the Beatles going to India and learning transcendental meditation, that was such a big deal back in those days among our youth. It was just all over the news and everything. And at a certain point, I said, okay, I'll try this transcendental meditation stuff. And I did, and it worked, and it did profound, it had profound benefit to me in my life. And so I plunged into it in a big way, and eventually became a teacher of it. And then years later, got more diverse in my approach to things. And here we are.
Wonderful. So where we are, we have very, very rich Philip Goldberg with his call it experiment, investigation, contemplation, and his love for words continued with him, and that also is available in the form of few books for us. So let me quickly bring to our viewers' attention. There is one book that came was Road Signs on the Spiritual Path, Living at the Heart of a Paradox. And I think before going to to next book, if you want to say some brief tidbit about this book.
That, you know, boy, that's about 20 years ago now, I think. I, as a practitioner, as a teacher, and as a writer, I was having conversations with people on spiritual paths, different paths, all striving for greater spiritual development. And I saw certain common patterns in all of our lives, and certain challenges that we all face on the spiritual path. And so I started doing research about it, and started to realize um, I had learned certain things that other people would benefit from. And I realized that a lot of it has to do with the fact that the world of relativity, the world of form, and that we all inhabit as the human condition, um, is very paradoxical, and we're always dealing with these kind of paradoxes as we progress on the spiritual path. And so I structured the book around that. It's very practical.
Wonderful. I will also mention a few more books. I want to ask you. You mentioned about being a good writer right from the beginning. So, in Indian or Sanatan or Hindu tradition, we have Shabda Brahma. So, words have a profound, significant presence as carrier of that which is beyond words. So ultimately, what remains is that which is within, and that is the silence. So
Yeah.
talk to me about how being a writer helped you, and also connected with being a writer's coach. How you felt that it is a natural extension for you.
Well, for one thing, part of the searching around that I mentioned was I was never sure what I should do as a career. I was interested in so many different things. Uh, and every time I thought maybe I'll become this, maybe I'll do that, it seemed too narrow. And the one thing at a certain took me a long time to realize this, but the one thing that was consistent in all my schooling and my first jobs and stuff was that I wrote well. And I realized at a certain point, to use another term from the Hindu tradition, it was my dharma. It was my sva dharma, that writing and dealing with words and ideas was what I was meant to do. And it suited my spiritual quest and teaching others about spirituality and meditation and everything, because I was essentially being a writer by standing in front of groups and speaking, but I also was writing, and the two were complementary. For one thing, the practices, meditation and yoga and all these practices, stabilized my mind enough so I could actually sit and write for a long time. And my mind was clearer. So it had a very practical influence on my work as a writer and speaker. But the other thing was it gave me something meaningful to write about. I couldn't always write about these things because I had to earn a living. And so I coached others and I did ghostwriting. I wrote about different subjects that I was paid to write about. But the most satisfying, other than writing fiction, but the most satisfying nonfiction was when I was able to combine these interests, my love of words, my the satisfaction of putting words on a page and shaping them with the ideas that I consider most important and that were most meaningful to me. And so my last few books enabled me to do that.
Beautiful. Um, Looking at the significance of writing and how it is very internal process. You are in tune to your solitude, and so each one probably will have some unique creative uh, process, or for the lack of better word. But where I want to lead, from writing to teaching to also teaching meditation, and you mentioned about your love for Bharat, and now Hindu University also offers a way to connect with the wisdom which is a part of the Vedic tradition. So let me
Mhm.
share this 30 seconds of information about Hindu University, and then we talk about
Sure.
how your association has made you feel.
Okay.
Spirituality, cosmology, and philosophy. Discover the treasure of ancient Vedic wisdom at Hindu University of America, an online university with global access and outstanding faculty, which has been setting standards of excellence across 7 areas of Hindu Dharma study through 12 plus programs and 120 courses shape the future of Sanatan Dharma in the world. Join Hindu University of America.
So the first image we saw in this on the laptop was you teaching, taking some class, I think, and you are also a part of. You are an ordained interfaith minister, and what I recollect from Hindu tradition, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, that is, the whole world is a family. And I think interfaith and the core essence of what we refer to as Hindu tradition, there is some overlap space which is quite profound. Talk to me about your association with Hindu University and how important it is in terms of an opportunity for people to learn.
Um, One of the books you see behind me is American Veda, and that came out in 2010. And it's the book I'm best known for, especially in the circles we are traveling now. Um, it's a history of how Hindu teachings, Vedic teachings that came to us from India, came to America and influenced us, and all the different streams and through which it filtered into the consciousness of America, not just through all the gurus who came, which we alluded to, but all the prominent Western people, artists, writers, philosophers, psychologists, scientists, who were influenced by these teachings and propagated them to the rest of us. That was, I think, a very important book, and it came to the attention of a lot of the Hindu Americans uh, who I got to know during the research for the book, and then after it came out, and I was doing public speaking and all this, and that's been very satisfying to me because, and in the years since the book came out, the prominence of Americans of Indian descent has just exploded, and temples are everywhere, and everything, and um, that's another stream through which the core Vedic principles have spread into the minds and hearts of Americans, some of who don't even know that's where these teachings came from. And so when Hindu University, and I knew some of the people, who are active in the Hindu American diaspora, when they started to offer online courses and the imperative to grow HUA came up, I was in conversation along, with many other people about how to do this and all that. And then I was asked to teach a course based on American Veda. So the first course I did for HUA is called How Hindu Dharma Transformed America. It's essentially using the book as an outline. But I like teaching it because you could do things in an online course that you can't do in a book, like show videos and play audios and things like that. And so that was the first course I did. And I was very happy to do it. And then in the subsequent years, the book that followed, American Veda, is also behind me on the shelf. Or here, there. No, not that one. The biography of Paramahansa Yogananda. So I wrote that, and that came out in 2018, a full-on biography of the iconic teacher who wrote Autobiography of a Yogi. And so the idea came up to teach a course on that. So we go through the whole autobiography of Yogi.
Let's pause here, and many people have read Autobiography of a Yogi, and people talk about it, and indeed it's a fabulous book with a lot of miraculous occurrences that are also a part of the journey of Paramahansa Yogananda, along with, of course, the wisdom. What was it about the life of Paramahansa Yogananda which appealed to you to the extent that you wrote this book?
Good question. And I asked myself that at the time. But when I wrote American Veda, there are profiles of all the most prominent gurus and swamis who came here. And some got a whole chapter because they had a huge impact. Yogananda was one of them. In writing about him and researching his life, I was fascinated with the human story of Yogananda. Because a lot of the gurus, we don't know much about their personal lives and their childhood and their family, but we knew enough about him. And it was fascinating to me. He was the first of the gurus to come here who made America his home. He lived here from age 27 to his passing at age 59, except for 1 year in India. And so I was fascinated with his life, but I only had 20 some odd pages to devote to it. So afterward, I thought maybe I should write a whole book about his life. But he already wrote Autobiography of a Yogi. So
that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
So I revisited the Autobiography of a Yogi for the third or fourth time or whatever. And I realized how much he left out. A lot of the Autobiography of a Yogi is not about him. It's about other people and
Yes.
about Indian philosophy. And as you said, great stories of siddhis and supernormal powers and all that. And I realized that he left a lot out. And there was one passage where he said something like, his first stop in America was Boston in 1920. And at a certain point, he says, and 4 years passed in Boston. And I said, what happened during those years? What was it like for him? How did he manage? What was, because it was the beginning of what would become this very important career, you could say, this mission. And so I realized how much was left out. And I said, somebody has to fill in those gaps. So it might as well be me. And that's why I did it. And it's a fascinating life.
Yeah, before we continue, when you talk to aspiring writers, I'm reminded of one quote, probably Einstein or somebody said that this 1% of inspiration and 99% of perspiration. Perspiration. So, how do you put that in the context of writing?
Uh, by the way, I think that quote was Thomas Edison.
Okay, yeah.
Well, it's very good because one of the things I discovered. Of course, I had to discover this for myself as a early days of wanting to be a writer. Um, I got advice from a professional writer very early on who told me, everybody can write. Everybody has stories to tell. Some people have talent for the words, but that's not enough. You have to have an inclination to sit there and labor over it and rewrite and write again and cross this out and move this to here and sit patiently and craft. It's not just all stuff that comes out of your head. The best writing looks like it was just poured out of somebody, but they worked very hard at letting you know, at making you feel like it just came out. So it's all natural and smooth. But so there's a great deal of writing and hard work and painstaking craftsmanship that goes in. It's not just all creative inspiration. It's like like music. You hear a musician and it all flows so beautifully. Well, they work very hard at that and they learn the fundamentals and so it's very similar in writing for publication. Writing for yourself, as for a journal or an email, is a whole different thing. But if you want to be a professional, that's what is expected of you, and not everybody's cut out for it. So it's one of the first things I tell people when I do writing coaching is make sure you have because I mainly work in books. It's one thing to write a 500-page essay. It's another thing to write a 50 or 100,000 word book. And there's a lot of work involved. So be
You have done a lot
prepared.
you have done a lot of work, and let me quickly bring the spiritual practice for crazy times.
Oh,
You've come
yeah.
up with very interesting titles. Here's one more, of course, the life of Yogananda we showed. Then this is next year,
Oh,
the intuitive edge, understanding and applying it in
those are
every.
oldies.
Yeah. So let me ask you about the title of the books. And I think if Veda was not preceded by American, it wouldn't be that cool or catchy for people.
It wouldn't explain what the book is. The book is about how the Vedas came to America. I have to say, I've been to India. I did a speaking tour when the book came out in India. I've been to India many times. And some people have been offended and they don't know what the book's about, but they see the title and they think the Americans are trying to steal the Vedas. And I have to convince them, no, that's not what this is about.
So let's talk about the tours, Veda tour to India. India.
American Veda Tours, yeah.
But how that concept came to you, and
Uh,
even before we go there, you yourself have been to India many times, and
yeah.
your initial impressions, and as if you have been to India, India is also changing as
Yes,
the whole world is in a state of transition.
yes.
It is not the same India as you might have seen in 60s, 70s if you were there. So talk to me about your impressions in a dynamic way about India.
It's very interesting because I started wanting to go to India, sometime around 1970. And one thing after another happened. And I didn't get there for about 30 years. I first went to India in 2001, but India had come to me. And I was living these teachings, incorporating them into my life. And I kept saying, I have to go to India. And I either had the time but no money, or I had the money but no time because I was busy. And one thing after another, finally I went in 2001, and one of my first stops was the Mahakumbh Mela in Allahabad.
Wow.
So
I think,
that was
yeah.
quite an introduction to India. But actually, my very first stop was Rishikesh, because I'd always wanted to go to Rishikesh, and I finally got to go. And I've been back a number of times since. And so I had my India experiences, and then I went back and I spent a month in the South on another visit. Then I went back again when American Veda came out, and I visited 18 different cities in a month, giving talks and stuff. And then I met somebody when I was giving a talk on American Veda in Portland, Oregon, and she was talking about how much she loves traveling in India. And I thought, I had the idea that maybe I could lead tours to India and take people to specialize in taking people to locations associated with the famous gurus. And that, because that's what I had researched in my book. So maybe it'd be a specialty. And that person became my partner in the business and made everything happen, because I just had the idea and I'm not that practical. And so we've now done 4 tours. We'll do another in 2025, and different parts of India, different places, but mostly still trying to focus on the principal areas where we can visit ashrams and temples and swamis, and it's been tremendously satisfying. And I got to know India in ways I couldn't have otherwise, and getting to share the adventure of it and the beauty of it and the all the colorful and extraordinary aspects of life as it's being lived in India. And you're right, it's changed a lot over the years, and some of it is sad, really. There's a westernization of India that I always tell people, well, if you want to emulate America, don't imitate the food and the fast food and the fashions. There's other more worthwhile things to emulate, but don't turn your back on your own history and your own culture and the treasures of the Indian spiritual tradition, which is what has been such a great gift to America.
Absolutely. I'm reminded of the call it reference, which is highlighted by the current Prime Minister Narendra Modi, is Vikas bhi, Virasat bhi. That is development without losing heritage. So at least they have that focus, but how much it is implemented, it's a very difficult balance to attain.
Well, last time I was in Rishikesh, there was a Burger King.
Yeah, yeah.
I, I thought, oh no, that's going too far.
Okay, if I may take you to Tiruvannamalai, because I love among many places that and Bhagwan Raman Maharshi, and we will just talk about maybe one or two saints, and then we'll move towards the concluding part of it. But I think his presence, even while there was no social media, there was something in his silence which could attract many Westerners, even at that time when India was not even probably even the initial independent India or before that. Yeah.
In American Veda and in the course I do for Hindu University, I have one chapter in the book, a session in the course about the impact of great yogis, great saints of India who never came to the West but had an impact here. And the two, Sri Ramakrishna, of course, had a big impact because of Vivekananda. And there's people like that. But Sri Aurobindo and Ramana Maharshi, both of whom passed in 1950 and weren't known in the West hardly at all, during their lifetimes. After their passing, have had an enormous impact on the West, because, and of course in India, because their legacy grew with, people who were followers of theirs, people who wrote about them, people who spoke about them, people who, then social media came. So Ramana Maharshi has had an enormous impact, even though he never, once he got to Tiruvannamalai, he never left. But there were some people who discovered him at the time, especially the British writer Paul Brunton, who wrote a book about him in the 40s. But subsequently, Americans found their way to Tiruvannamalai and to people teaching in Ramana's name. And now Tiruvannamalai is this sort of international center of Advaita Vedanta. It's fascinating, actually. So Ramana's influence, even though there are people who've been deeply influenced by Ramana Maharshi who never heard of him. They don't even know his name, but they studied with somebody who was, part of the transmission of, his teachings. Every 10 days or so, I post a new interview, and the show is called Spirit Matters. It's on the mindbodyspirit.fm platform. And I interview spiritual teachers and scholars and wise people, who have something to teach all of us from different paths, different traditions, different lineages. And it's a new format of a podcast I did for 5 or 6 years that I co-hosted. That also, if people want to they find it, the earlier version of Spirit Matters has about 300 interviews on there. But the new one is at mindbodyspirit.fm. And I highly recommend it. It's free, of course, and it's my ongoing learning experience.
Through your podcast and through your interactions with other spiritual luminaries in their own field, coming from different faiths, you have offered a treasure of such enlightening dialogues. But how that makes you feel? Many times when you feel that I have arrived, I have attained, you are not that open to listen to others. So talk to me
Oh,
about your experience on that.
I think if you stop wanting to learn from others, you're stagnating. It's constant learning. And I think one of the reasons I continue doing this podcast called Spirit Matters is, one, I think it's a seva. I'm bringing very smart and interesting people to talk about spirituality from their own perspectives. And I think it's very beneficial for people. But it's also good for me. I learn something with every interview I do. You do the same thing. You learn something from them. And in Spirit Matters, like some of I've interviewed well-known swamis. I've interviewed American spiritual
Yeah,
teachers.
you also interviewed Sadhguru sometimes.
I have interviewed Sadhguru, but not on the current podcast. I interviewed him a few times, and visited him in his ashram with my groups. But some of the swamis from the Ramakrishna Vivekananda lineage I've had on my podcast. I've had Christian teachers, I've had rabbis, I've had Sufis. And because one of the most important things that I learned early on from the Vedic tradition was that core teaching that truth is one and the wise call it by many names, which is very compatible with what some of the scholars of religion have learned, that if you look at spiritual traditions in the right way, not by their dogma and their, all that, but what transforms people's lives, what are the deep insights of what we call the mystical traditions. So Sufis, mystical Jews, the Christian mystics, you find revelations that are extremely compatible with the revelations of the rishis, of Buddha, of Vyasa and Shankara and Ramana Maharshi and all the Ramakrishna, all the others. This unity of the human consciousness and the consciousness that we call Brahman, it comes out in all these conversations I have with people.
Beautiful. Meditation, I'll quickly wrap up with two questions, and one relates to is it possible for someone to teach meditation? Sometimes we hear the expression that meditation happens, and there could be no structured way for meditation. And then you have different ways in which you are taught meditation or courses are offered. So there is a sense of little bit of confusion sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very true. And I've been experiencing this for 50 plus years because it's a beautiful paradox. A Buddhist teacher once said, enlightenment is an accident, but meditation makes you accident prone.
I like it.
So, and Ramakrishna said, grace, what he called, was translated as
Okay.
grace, awakening, it's always, it's like the wind. It blows, it's around you, but you have to set your sails properly. And so, yes, it's all flow and it's all happening and it's all natural, but there are methods. And that's what, the yoga tradition has given us, all these different methods. Dhyan, dharana, pranayam, they're all there, in the yoga tradition. And so to me, meditation is, there's different forms of meditation. And I always advocate for people to favor the methods that don't require a lot of mind control. That because, this is, I don't want to take too much time, but the effortlessness and naturalness is more compatible with deep experience. But you need a little instruction to get started. And and people who just sit down and try to quiet their mind, they start to try to quiet their mind, and they're making the mind more noisy by trying to quiet the mind. But there's methods and the qualified teachers who can, point you in the right direction.
Talking about the right direction, there are different reasons for which people are drawn towards holy places, and in Bhagavad Gita also there is Sakam Bhakti, Nishkam Bhakti, or so there are some devotees who are going there seeking certain favors which would help them in attaining some material pursuits. There are some who are there just for the God's sake, etc. And then there is another thing which as we were referring to autobiography of a yogi, and so many people are drawn towards to looking for some esoteric experiences or some miraculous unfolding, and many times we hear about them, and I believe it is happening now also. And there are some sages, you go in their presence, you feel different, or something happens which you cannot logically explain with all that background. Something like that ever happened in your presence for you in India or here or anywhere?
I know people who have had miraculous experiences and all this. That's never been my path. My path is more, to me, the ordinary is more profound and more deep. So my experience is, if I'm in the presence of a great teacher, or if I'm in a temple, or if I'm in an ashram, or if I'm sitting in my chair meditating by myself, and I have deep peace and silence and the feeling that I have no boundaries, that to me fulfills the definitions of samadhi and turiya that we read about. City powers, mind powers, manifesting things, doing yogic tricks, meaningless. And I mean, and all the great teachers will say that these things are possible. These things may happen. These things teach us certain things about the powers of the mind and consciousness, but don't get distracted by them.
Absolutely. And I think what you have just said also resonates with what Swami Vivekananda said. And he also mentioned that there could be infinite paths to reach the infinite. So each path has its own respect and value. And I'm really happy to be talking to you, as well as learning as and sharing about the wealth of knowledge and your experience, which is also available in the form of these wonderful books, as well as podcasts, and of course through Hindu University of America also you are sharing your knowledge. Um,
Yes, I'm very honored to be part of that.
and as we conclude, sometimes people work with plans, or they have a vision that 10 years from now this is what I would like, or this is my dream, etc. Anything like that in your bucket list?
I'm getting too old to have a 10-year plan. No, I have certain bucket list things. And to be honest, I'm working on a book, 2 books now. But the thing I want most to accomplish is to complete the novel that I'm working on, which has a lot to do with what we've been talking about, because it's based on the experience of people like me in the 1960s discovering these teachings of India and trying to integrate them into our lives here in the West. And in my case, the elements of the plot and the story have a lot to do with things in my family. So it's my mission to complete that. As if I leave that as a legacy, I'll be very happy. But I want to continue. To honestly, the other thing is, whatever I've learned over the course of all these years, I feel now that I'm at this stage of life, I have a responsibility. My dharma, so to speak, is to share and to help other people along the way, and especially in what are very crazy times.
Absolutely, absolutely. Such a pleasure and honor to be talking to author, public speaker, spiritual counselor, writing coach, faculty of Hindu University of America, and a wonderful human being, and a great
Thank you,
teacher, I
Ashok.
would say.
My
uh,
honor to be with you.
with lots and lots of good wishes for you, sir. Namaste, and thanks for
Garth.
joining us.